Mormonism's founder, Joseph Smith, was born in 1805 in Sharon, Vermont. Smith claimed in 1820 that he had a vision wherein he saw God the Father and his Son Jesus Christ. This event came to be known as the first vision within Mormon theology. Several important events happened over the following years. Joseph claimed to be visited by an angelic visitor named Moroni, who showed him where gold plates were deposited in a hill near his home in Palmyra, New York. Joseph claimed that these plates were an ancient record of peoples on the Americas that would later become sacred scripture within Mormonism known as the Book of Mormon. During this time, Joseph Smith also married his first wife, Emma Hale. And in 1830, when the Book of Mormon was published, he also founded the Church of Christ, later to be known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Joseph Smith produced several texts that are seen by the Mormon religion as sacred scripture, one of which is the Book of Commandments, later to be known as the Doctrine and Covenants. One of the sections in the Book of Commandments was section 132, which Joseph Smith claimed he received as revelation and was scripture to the saints, commanding the church to practice polygamy. While this section, numbered 132, was not published until after Joseph Smith's death, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints acknowledges that at least parts of this revelation were received as early as 1831. Polygamy pervaded Mormon theology and history in those ensuing decades, but the very first polygamist in Mormonism was Joseph Smith himself. Smith is reported to have between 30 and 40 wives, with most historians and scholars settling around 34. The youngest, two of them in fact, were at 14 years old. 11 were already married to other men. There was one mother-daughter pair, 8 biological sister wives, and 7 teenage brides. Joseph Smith is reported, and such is acknowledged by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that he practiced polyandry, or the practice of marrying women who were already married. Joseph Smith also had many young wives. The wives under the age of 20, Fanny Elger, 16, Sarah Ann Whitney, 17, Flora Ann Woodworth, 16, Lucy Walker, 17, Sarah Lawrence, 17, Helen Mar Kimball, 14, Nancy Winchester, 14. While we know many of the wives of Joseph Smith, there is no certainty about the exact number of women that he married. And in some cases, we have partial information, but have been unable to track down the specific women that Joseph Smith was married or sealed to. One such instance is in John C. Bennett's Expose of Mormonism. John C. Bennett, in the late 1830s, early 1840s, was a friend and ally to both Joseph Smith and the Saints. He served as the assistant president of the church. He was the mayor of Nauvoo, though he was eventually excommunicated. Allegedly, he was trusted by Joseph Smith to the point where his brother Hiram Smith and others, such as Sarah Pratt, acknowledged that Bennett was trusted to perform abortions in Nauvoo when plural wives that were kept secret got pregnant. When Bennett was excommunicated and left the Mormons, he wrote an expose titled Mormonism Exposed by John C. Bennett, published in 1842. In that book, John C. Bennett divulges several of the names of the plural wives of the prophet Joseph Smith, though out of respect for these women, he obscures their names, using just the first letter of their last name and then fills in the remaining letter with asterisks. Historians and scholars have figured out the majority of these, which are either likely or certainly Agnes Smith, who was the widow of Joseph Smith's brother Don Carlos Smith, Louisa Beeman, Presendia Bull, Elizabeth Durfee, Sylvia Sessions, and Sarah Babson. But one such name has evaded historians and scholars alike. Bennett refers to a Mrs. G, and after the G are 5 asterisks to fill in the remaining portion of the name. One historian and scholar, Fawn Brodie, author of No Man Knows My History, tried to make the connection on who that was. She suggested that Mrs. G was in fact Sally Ann Fuller Gully, Gulley. For decades, the best we had to go on was this connection by Fawn Brodie, linking Mrs. G to Sally Ann Fuller Gully. But LDS scholar Brian Hales and author of Joseph Smith's Polygamy has pointed out that Sally Ann Fuller did not marry Samuel Gully until January 29th, 1847, which makes this an unlikely, if not impossible match, since Bennett wrote his book in 1842. It appeared as though we had hit a dead end until recent years when the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, through its project, the Joseph Smith Papers Project, published documents, images, and transcripts to its website, which included, of all things, land deeds. On the screen, you will see several deeds, the first of them to Joseph Smith's first wife, Emma Smith, and their family. You will notice there the cost of the piece of land with money in hand was $10,000. But also several other of Joseph Smith's plural wives received land deeds in the early 1840s. This one is a deed to Flora Ann Woodworth, his 16-year-old plural wife. Notice the cost of the land, $1,000. This $1,000 price for land was unusually high among the land deeds that were sold in Nauvoo in the 1840s. But strangely, we find that $1,000 price prevalent among several of the plural wives of Joseph Smith who received land in the 1840s. Here is the deed to Sarah Ann Whitney for $1,000. Here is the deed to Patty Bartlett Sessions. This one was $150. Sylvia Sessions, $500. Mary Elizabeth Rawlings Leitner, $50. Helen Mar Kimball, his 14-year-old plural wife, $50. Sarah Scott Mulholland, $50. Elizabeth Buchanan Coolidge, $100. Elizabeth Davis Durfee, $200. To the Partridge Sisters, $1,000. All of these are wives of the prophet Joseph Smith, and while all of the wives do not have $1,000 pieces of property, that number is extremely high for the land that was sold by Joseph Smith to members of the church. And when we see that $1,000 price, and notice that the deed is to women in particular, it seems to indicate some connection to plural marriage. Deed to Marinda Nancy Johnson Hyde, another plural wife of Joseph Smith, for $500. Deed to Lydia Dibble Granger for $100. All of these deeds went to women who are believed by historians and scholars to be the plural wives of Joseph Smith. The final deed was one that was tracked down recently among the Joseph Smith Papers Project documents. This deed is to Jane Gully, 20th of May, 1844. And this deed was for $1,000. Land being given to a woman on her own was extremely strange in the 1840s. But Joseph Smith, as the trustee in trust for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, seems to have a pattern of giving land to his plural wives. So when we see a land deed being given to a woman, and noting the unusually high price of $1,000 for several deeds within this collection, and how they match up strangely with being also plural wives of Joseph Smith. It seems to indicate that this Jane Gully was a plural wife of the prophet Joseph Smith. While we can't be certain for sure, this Jane Gully seems to fit a match with Mrs. G better than Sally Ann Fuller Gully. Jane's last name matches the number of characters in Bennett's expose. Now, you will have noticed that in the land deed, it was just Gully. We'll get to that in just a moment. While Jane's last name matches the number of characters in Bennett's expose, we also note that she received a land deed that was valued unusually high at $1,000, matching several of the other plural wives of Joseph Smith. While Sally's name of Gully also matches, one must make the allowance of having Bennett put the married name of Gully that she would not take on until Bennett left Nauvoo, as her maiden name was Fuller and she didn't marry a Gully until 1847. Bennett published his book in 1842, which makes this essentially impossible. Little is known about Jane Gully in Nauvoo in the 1840s, also explaining why this plural wife of Mrs. G has been difficult to track down. What do we know about Jane Gully? Very little, in fact. We don't have any dates for her birth or her death. In fact, the only other piece of information we know is found in the Nauvoo Neighbor, a local newspaper in Nauvoo, Illinois, and printed by believing members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This particular issue was published on January 3rd, 1844. On page 3, we get a list of letters at the post office which have not been claimed by the folks in Nauvoo, and the list of those who have not claimed the letters is given. When we go down to the letter G, the very last name, Jane Gully, spelled Gulley. While we can't be sure who Mrs. G is, Jane Gully is the best match based on the evidence given here in this presentation. This presentation was brought to you by Mormon Discussion Incorporated. We are a nonprofit that produces historical examinations within Mormon history. If you enjoy Mormon history, please check us out, as there are tons of stories, historical documents, and scholarly examination of the events within Mormonism. You can visit our website at mormondiscussionpodcast.org or mormondiscussions.org. If anybody knows anything more about Jane Gully in Nauvoo in the early 1840s or otherwise, please email us at mormondiscussions with an S on the end, podcast with an S on the end, at gmail.com.